There are plenty of interesting people online. We all know that, and it's redundant to even bring it up. But sometimes there's a few people in an interesting person's circle that are just intriguing as well. With Chris Chan, for example, there are plenty of notable people to look into. We could spend all day talking about Chris's gal pals, or his trolls, or his internet friends, or his history with Megan. But I think the most interesting people in his life, other than himself, has to be his parents. They did have the largest influence on him, after all. Unless you count her in video games, TV, and naughty content, because, well, he absorbed those things like a sponge. While yes, Chris's parents ultimately failed at raising him for a variety of complicated and depressing reasons, I believe his father, Bob Chandler, was the better between the two. Barb was just content with hoarding trash, taking up space, and sleeping. Bob was a simple guy who made some bad decisions and got himself into a bad spot. His story is incredibly ironic, as we see his rising potential when he's taking care of himself and his steep fall when he meets Barbara and eventually spawns Chris. Bob's story, much like everyone else in Chris's little narrative universe, is a modern Greek tragedy. His journey began on the 4th of September 1927 at 4:15 p.m. Robert Franklin Chandler Jr. was born in Fort Worth, Texas, thanks to his loving parents, Robert Franklin Chandler Sr. and Jean Holloman. He had 8 younger half-siblings on his father's side of the family. Unfortunately, not too much more is known about his family. He does, however, claim that he has Cherokee relatives that reside in the state upstairs, Oklahoma. His future son would also hold this alleged native blood with high personal regard. Thankfully, we note that this is complete nonsense because Chris got a DNA test in 2018 that disproved these claims. Since about the age of 10, Bob has always been interested in the world around him, saying, quote, "I have been very interested in the world since I was about 10 years old, and that was 70 years ago, and I'm very fond of and I really truly believe in the United Nations, but you won't find anybody else in my countryside or around here, I think, that does. Anyway, I'm very world conscious." This interest prompted him to start collecting stamps from different places. This really did work out great for him because of his desire to know just about anything and everything about the world, and honestly, I can't imagine there was much else to do in the late 1930s, especially when you were a kid. The first stamp he'd add to his collection was King Michael of Romania. His primary focus for his collection was on the United Nations and other foreign countries. He would eventually accrue a collection of 6 boxes worth of stamp books, which is definitely impressive. He was also very interested in music, amassing a vast collection of records and other music formats. Over the span of his life, he'd collect somewhere between 15,000 to 20,000 LPs from various genres over the span of many ranging cultures. Come to think of it, I am kinda curious how he crammed that many vinyl records into his house. About 100 or so of these vinyl records survived the house fire in 2014, but the records were later sold by Chris to fuel his Lego fund. Bob also hosted a radio show many years ago going over many different types of music, which is, pretty cool.
And Bob, if you'd be so kind, tell us about this music you're about to play for us.
Okay, this is jazzy jugs, kazoos, and washboards. It's a style of American jazz that has been far too long overlooked. Because musical is a jug, though a bottle or even length of pipe will serve as well. By half spitting, half vocalizing into it, a player can produce a fruity, resonant sound, not dissimilar to that of a tuba or string bass. Larger glass vessels and earthenware demijohns does produce a full boom. The player may alter the sound by blowing into the jug at different angles. Singers who like to vocalize through a kazoo, a submarine-like look-alike toy that imparts a buzzing sound to the vocal sound similar to that of a comb and paper.
Anyway, back to Bob's youth. He joined the Boy Scouts, obviously starting off as an Eagle Scout. He later became a Scoutmaster and served over 20 years, more than answering his call for duty. Based on a plethora of information that was harvested from his 1942 yearbook from Sylacauga High School, he was in the Glee Club and graduated in the spring of 1945. After completing high school, he moved his life forward by attending college, namely Auburn University, where he was majoring in aeronautical engineering. His extensive work in this field caught the eye of the U.S. Army, who desired his skills and expertise for their uses. They proceeded to enlist him as a special draftee. During his time in the service, he learned how to install, work with, and maintain valve systems, alongside operating many types of technology like telephones and switchboards. While serving until 1948, he was sent to Korea for a year to install infrastructure for the stationed U.S. soldiers. After finishing his work with the military, he enrolled in Jacksonville State Teachers College, now known as Jacksonville State University. He studied pre-engineering, but he wouldn't stay there for long, as 2 years later he'd leave to return to Auburn. He then studied electrical engineering and subsequently graduated in 1952. All of the hard work he put in made him very proficient in his field, allowing him to enjoy a career of about 40 years as an engineer. He designed a variety of electrical subsystems for Western Electric and then later General Electric. While working under GE, Bob was responsible for at least 7 different patents. His work includes, but is certainly not limited to, a paper mill that was used in the production of Kleenex tissues, an automated steel mill for rolling steel, primarily for cars, various work for warehousing, railroads, and huge tanker ships, die casting machines, components for scooters, plastic production, some kind of vehicle logging system, and controls for a plastic water container molding machine. Bob's hard work was applauded by the then general manager of General Electric, saying, quote, "Bob Chandler is one of the most creative engineers in the organization. It really isn't hard to see why people held Bob's accomplishments to such a high regard." Additionally, his patents were apparently so important to Chris and Barb that they opted to mention Bob's illustrious work history when they believed that they were in direct correspondence with Miyamoto, with Barb suggesting that the NES might not have arrived so soon without his contributions, despite the fact that Bob worked in an entirely different country in an entirely different market and field. Bob also married his first wife, Patricia Harley, in 1956. The couple would have 2 children together, David, who was born in 1962, and Carol in 1969. Bob was living in Winston-Salem, North Carolina at the time, but he had to move to Utica, New York for his work. He wasn't much of a fan of the cold weather conditions up north, which makes sense given his youth was mostly spent in hotter climates. The chilly breeze would eventually push Bob to relocate to Roanoke, Virginia. This move was especially significant for Bob, as he claimed this is where he discovered his love of the mountains, which likely tied very closely to his fascination with the world. Some years later, in 1975, he moved to Richmond. He separated from his wife on June 28, 1976, staying in Richmond for work until about 1980. Shortly after that, he transferred to Charlottesville, working for Goodyear and Goodrich respectively. Bob met his second and final lover, Barbara Ann Weston, at Maddie's Pub in 1979. Bob was singing the night that Barb and one of her friends happened to show up, and his sultry tones clearly tickled her fancy. She allegedly made the first move by chasing him down the hall, which certainly paints an odd mental image. According to Chris, this story is 100% factual, but his mother has since denied the validity of this claim. In the year of our Lord 1980, Bob finally divorced his wife on January 28th. This was very lucky for Bob because now he could finally lock Barbara down in holy matrimony. He married her just mere months after his divorce had been finalized. He was ready to jump right back into marriage and get on with the next chapter of his life. Barb later claimed that she only married Bob because he owned a house, painting a clear image that she saw him as more of a security blanket than an actual lover. Barb already had one child from a previous marriage, named Cole Smithy. Cole was about 17 when Bob married his mother, and around the same time, he chose to leave in hopes of carving out a path for his future. Cole always felt that, for whatever reason, Bob was a negative figure in his life, having somehow driven a wedge between him and his mother. But Cole has always been kind of a negative guy. He told Chris via email correspondence that he would be elated when That Fuck Bob finally drops, which is quite the hurtful thing to say to your own half-brother about his father. But regardless, Cole saw the hatred he had for Bob as mutual, but there is absolutely no evidence for this claim. Back to our loving couple, Bob and Barb waited a little too long to finally elope, bumping their uglies far beyond their prime years. About 9 months after one of their sloppy backwoods fuckfest, their love would manifest into their first and only son together, Christopher Weston Chandler. This was an opportunity for both of them to do things better this time around with a kid of their own, a blank canvas that would grow into an adult with a sophisticated personality. This obviously was a fucking catastrophe. His story after this point is still somewhat shrouded in mystery, as he wasn't active on the internet in any capacity, so the opportunities to pick his brain were few and far between. All we do know, however, is that his life became more isolated and cold, having only Barb and their hellspawn to consume the remainder of his life. Bob and Barb both coddled Chris, but Bob genuinely intended to pass on his knowledge and experiences to his son. This clearly demonstrates the incredible amount of love that he had for Chris. Unfortunately, the love was not properly reciprocated. One example of this, according to Chris at least, is that Bob told him that he cared for him for 29 years despite the many trials and tribulations, so Chris should drop the bullshit and show his old man a little gratitude. Chris dismissed this, suggesting that Bob supporting him was his obligation as a parent, so being appreciative was not even remotely necessary. An example of Bob trying to pass on his experiences to Chris is seen when Bob purchased a beginner's stamp book for Chris in 1992. His interest in collecting postage stamps did leave some kind of impression on Chris, as he seemed to take to the hobby initially. Chris even had a few pages filled in himself. This collection would be sold in 2017, with Bob's written permission that he allowed his son to sell his collections when he inherited them. Chris priced them decently at about $5 per set, but then he tried to sell his own tiny personal collection for $1,000, just because he's Chris. Just goes to show how much he prioritized his own self-worth over those who are around him. Bob must have been rolling in his grave. Another example of Bob's love for Chris was his intervention with Chris's finances. As we all know, Chris sucked ass at holding on to his money, because fuck me did he love buying toys and video games. Bob assumed control of Chris's bank account in late 2009, monitoring it closely throughout 2010. He was so concerned for Chris that he even paid Chris's outstanding debts out of his own pocket, just so his son wouldn't be hit with climbing interest rates. That, my friends, is love. He tried so hard to save his son, even though it was a wasted effort. Bob even tried to help Chris attempt a pushback against the multinational networked criminal enterprise of trolls from all over the globe. Chris had convinced Bob that the trolls were only after him because of the tremendous success of his Sonic fanfiction. Bob unfortunately was not able to cut the internet down enough to kill the virtual boogeymen that live in the computer box. But I think we've spent enough time discussing Bob's personal life, when we definitely need to cover some of his more notable appearances in the chronicles of our favorite man-child with an Oedipus complex. One of Bob's most significant and memorable appearances in Chris's story was when he walked in on Chris tugging on his tallywhacker. The episode starts about as well as you would expect. Chris decided that he really needed to spank his monkey while having some steamy cyber sex with Julie. At this time, there was only one computer in the entire Chandler shack, and it unfortunately was localized in the kitchen, the best place for masturbating, or at least so I'm told. Because Chris was busy getting his spastic rocks off over a voice chat, Julie, or rather Blue Spike, tipped off other people, who then tipped off other people, that Chris was in the kitchen with his hands firmly grasped around his bent duck. If how he holds his pencils is any sign of how he holds other things, namely his PP, I fear for his battered hose. The trolls concocted a master plan to overthrow Chris's endeavors of achieving climax. They called Bob about 4 times, with 3 of the calls failing because Bob told them that Chris was sleeping. The last call finally convinced Bob to get up and check on Chris, because the caller claimed that Chris posted a video online where he was claiming that he was going to do something drastic, end-of-life-itis. Bob rushed to the kitchen, zipping around mounds of useless shit laying around the dump, possibly knocking over several piles of clothes in the process. He confronted Chris, asking him what he was doing, unaware that Chris was perfectly safe because Chris was preoccupied with strangling his other head. The two bickered for a bit, but Bob ultimately cut the internet down by shutting off Chris's computer.
Oh, yeah. Listen, what are you doing? Nothing. I'm getting all these crazy damn calls. What are you doing? Nothing. Give me that crap. Now, what's going on?
Dad, will you get out of here?
No, I will not. People tell me that you're about to kill yourself on YouTube.
What?
What are you doing?
I'm not doing anything.
I'm going to wake your mother up and find out?
No.
Well, then get out of here and off that internet.
Fine.
What is your trouble?
I'm not going to kill myself.
Get away from that TV.
Fine.
Get away from the internet. I'm cutting it down right now.
No! Dad, no!
Yes.
No!
What are you doing?
Don't do it, Dad.
I'm going to shut this thing right down.
No.
Yes.
No. Dad, no.
Stop. Go wake your mother up. Don't bother me. Okay? Go wake your mother up. Don't bother me. Go and wake your mother up. You tell her what's going on. This thing is going to go down.
No.
Yes.
Another notable Bob-related entry in Chris's many sagas was the time he chaperoned Chris on his very first date. Chris landed a romantic outing with Emily, a girl who he was desperately trying to court, at the Charlottesville Fashion Square shopping mall. Because Chris had such a hard time talking to the Whammons, Bob did most of the talking. He and Emily held a pretty consistent conversation about many different aspects of life. Meanwhile, Chris occasionally tried to interject, but just completely failed with every attempt. Bringing Bob on the date just made no damn sense, but hey, to each their own. This was just a single hour of a pathetic outing, and it was coming to a close. Emily and Chris walked away, finally having some alone time from the well-spoken elder. But of course, something just had to go wrong for Chris. The man in the pickle suit rescued Emily from a terrible evening with Chris. Such a hero. Side note, but imagine how Chris explained the Pickle Man to his father. He had to be confused at the idea of a sentient pickle stealing his son's would-be girlfriend. And of course, who could forget the classic "That Is My House" incident? In a video uploaded on the 27th of August 2009, titled ECV00193, Chris had a little visit from his father during one of his many recorded freakouts. In the days prior, Chris created a video where he performed a house tour of the Chandler clan headquarters, showcasing the disgusting living conditions that he and his parents were nesting in. The video that was initially uploaded just featured an angry Chris, ranting and raving, demanding that his house tour be removed from the internet, because otherwise he's going to get the law involved. An uncut version of this video was leaked by Vivian G just 2 days later, featuring a cut segment where Bob interrupted Chris's video, interjecting his own valid viewpoints and explaining the dire situation that Chris had put the family in. Perhaps if Chris didn't scream and yell, Bob wouldn't have had to come in to heighten the video status to the stuff of legends.
This does not even deserve a captain's log introduction, because this is dead serious. The inside and outside tour I did a few months ago of my house, everyone on the internet, my mother and my father are angry at me. They're blaming at me. It's my fault. I admit it's my fault. I want everything about my house off the internet. I'll send in detectives. I'll send in police. I'll send in everything in my power to get it off the internet.
Listen to me.
Yes.
Listen to me.
Yes.
Shut that goddamn thing off. I don't care what you do. You get all that stuff off of there tonight.
I'm working on it.
Go work on it.
I am
Do
working.
you realize something? Let me tell you. If the health department of Greene County sees those videos that you put on the damn internet, they could condemn our house and we would have to move out of it.
I see.
You go get that goddamn stuff off of there and fast.
I'm working on it. I was making a video for you to tell everybody to get the images off of the internet. It's out of my control.
Oh, you get them off.
It's out of my control. I don't know where to go. I don't know where to
You
go.
loaded them up there. You unload them.
I'm working on it.
Go do it.
I am doing it. I'm sorry.
Get in here and do it. I'll be up all night with you if I have to. You won't get any sleep for that stuff.
I'm working on it.
Get in there and start.
I'm working on it. Let me do these stupid videos. I can tell everybody at my command to get everything, help me get everything off the internet about our house.
I don't want to get kicked out of my house by the health department. And what you just did was stick a knife in our back and kill us.
All right, let me just.
Get that stuff off of there.
I'm
Get it off of there fast.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. So yeah, please get everything off of the internet now. Curse the trolls. Peace to everybody else.
But now I really gotta ask, why did Chris think it was a good idea to send the original unmolested video to Vivian? Truly profound logic there. And as you obviously can tell, Bob was unsuccessful in making Chris unload that video from the internet. But yeah, Bob would show up in Chris's story plenty more times. But another notable instance of his presence is the Chandler family Christmas video. It's not very comfortable to watch, kinda plays out like a found footage horror movie. See for yourself.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it's recording. So, here we are around the Christmas tree. We're gonna open presents.
Hooray.
Okay, well, first off, I have a card from my family. Your father, you read the card.
I see.
Why don't you open some of your gifts, Chris?
I'll wait.
You,
That's okay, I'll wait.
it'll take a long time.
No, it won't take that long. Hi,
Am I supposed
Daisy.
to read it?
Yes, read it.
Am I supposed to read it out loud?
Yeah. Read
see.
to Mom.
I want to thank you all for your support and love throughout my fantastic love quest. Pooey. And if Santa doesn't bring me one, no Thomas. Like I asked him, then I'm going to need some support finding a boyfriend free. It'll come, Christian. Hope you all like my presents.
Okay.
Today I'm thinking of Christmas and remembering you all. Merry Christmas, Christian C.
Yep. Alright, Father, first I gave you presents. Well, first you got shoes. They both had the same content,
Since you choose whether you want it on DVD or VHS.
I see.
They have everything same thing except the VHS is recorded off of the DVD. So which one do you want, VHS or DVD?
I don't know. I'll take DVD. I don't like VHS much.
Really?
VHS.
So you want the VHS?
Yeah.
There you go.
I'm not much for the other.
DVD.
Why do we have it on both?
I gave him a choice, remember? You remember he originally wanted DVD? Yeah, Frango Rockfather, that's what's on there.
I see.
Snowboarding stuff. Yep. Oh, that's my present for Sarah. Because, she might come over.
I don't know what she will.
Well, she did last year, remember? Want music? There you go. I think y'all really like what I got here. Oh, yeah, I taped these two boxes together here. I'm sorry.
I've lost track of where all my music is.
Snow Globe, with me in it.
Merry Christmas, Robert.
It's also got Sonichu in it. Look, see, me on one side, Sonichu on the other.
That's cool.
I got it over at Walmart. The Snow Globe.
But the fun stuff had to come to an end at some point. Now, we've got to start going over the less than pleasant parts of Bob's story. Bob's later years were spent completely isolated, stuck with just Barb and Chris. He was living off of his social security checks and pension from General Electric, which means he should have been enjoying his well-deserved rest period, but of course things just weren't that simple. Living in the Chandler household has to be the same as living in a cave with echoed voices talking to you. It was desolate. Hell, he'd often ramble aimlessly to anybody who called the house and was willing to listen, including complete strangers and invested trolls who were looking to get a rise out of him. He spent a majority of his time just sitting around, watching TV, listening to music, and taking care of his greenhouse. He had a swing set up in it, next to a stereo system from the 70s. He'd often sit on this apparatus, listening to some tunes, so he could swing with the music as he called it. It would seem at this point that his plants and music were his closest friends. They were a positive constant in his life. Throughout his long and accomplished life, his health had been kinda shaky. He had 2 triple bypasses and 4 separate heart attacks, with the 2 bypasses occurring in August of 1980. Mr. Chandler also had an artificial pacemaker implanted into his body. Bob also claimed that he had several near-death experiences, but he chose to not go to the light. Tying closely to his near-death experiences, Bob revealed in a call with a troll that his doctors had found a fluid buildup in his legs, which is a symptom of congestive heart failure. His declining health understandably worried him. Who was going to take care of his family when he passed? Despite his dwindling health, he claimed that his supposed Cherokee blood was what kept him alive, as if it was a force of nature. His uncles and grandfather all succeeded at living beyond the age of 90, so he most likely wanted to achieve that for himself. Despite this, he still ate at Burger King every single day, at least according to Chris when he was giving his loyal fan base a tour around his local area. But shit, honestly, I can't blame Bob. I could really go for one of their breakfast sandwiches right about now. On the 1st of March 2010, Chris posted a tweet stating that Bob had been admitted to a hospital for quote, congested heart failure. He was pretty positive that his father wouldn't be in the hospital for long, despite how visibly sick his father appeared at this point. This definitely should have been a wake-up call for Chris to get his shit together, because Bob was carrying the tremendous weight of the Chandler family on his shoulders. Chris ultimately failed at this. Chris was unusually mum regarding the topic of his father's hospitalization, which we all knew was strange because Chris has a hard time keeping his mouth shut. Instead, he opted to talk about his internet girlfriends, saying naughty things on the internet about cartoon characters, and generally just complain about his participation in predictable internet drama. His father's condition may just not have been on his mind, showcasing Chris's ignorance of the gravity of the situation. Furthermore, even if he wasn't getting his life together, he should have been spending time with his father during this trying period, not whining on the internet. On the 24th of March 2011, Bob claimed that doctors had discovered that he had colon cancer. His son would send a subsequent email to Jackie on April 23rd, wherein he stated that Bob had received the required surgery for his cancer. Some months would pass before Bob's next medical episode. On August 29th of the same year, Chris mentioned that Bob was in very poor health and was suffering from what he called feet bloatings. At some point in early September, Bob was rushed to the hospital for heart failure. It was later discovered that Bob was put into quarantine when he arrived because he was covered in bug bites, posing him as a contamination risk for the other patients. But his story came to a close not long after, as on September 6, 2011, Bob passed away at the age of 84. Out of respect for Bob and his grieving family, the Quickie closed its doors for a week, the starting date being on September 12th, the day of Bob's service. Visitors of the site were greeted with a page that simply read Robert Franklin Chandler Jr., 1927 to 2011. His obituary reads as follows. Robert Franklin Chandler Jr., 84, of Ruckersville, passed away the morning of Tuesday, September 6, 2011, at Martha Jefferson Hospital ICU, surrounded by family, pastor, and hospital staff. He was born on September 4, 1927, in Texas, the son of the late Robert Franklin Chandler Sr. and Jean Holloman Chandler. On June 7, 1980, he married Barbara Ann Weston, who survives, and the couple gave birth to a son, Christian Weston Chandler, who survives. Also surviving is his ex-wife, Patricia, and their shared children. Son, Dr. David Allen Chandler, survives, and daughter, Carol Suzanne Chandler, survives. He graduated from Auburn University with a degree in engineering. He served in the United States Army, Seoul, Korea, in the Signal Corps during the Korean War. He worked for General Electric as an engineer with steels, plastic, etc. He also had patents for the controls for plastic molding machines. Without him, we would not even have a simple plastic funnel. Also surviving are granddaughter, Savannah Chandler, the daughter of David Allen Chandler, and his wife, Kimberly. A funeral service will be held at Monticello Memory Gardens in Charlottesville, Virginia, 10 a.m. Monday, September 12, 2011. A memorial service will follow on a later date at Wesley Memorial United Methodist Church. Instead of flowers, you may make monetary donations to his widow, Barbara Chandler, and son, Christian Chandler. The trolls attempted to contact Chris in regards to his father's passing, resulting in what would be called the black tape. Chris did not respond well to these inquiries, breaking down into tears and clearly demonstrating that he was in emotional distress, which is more than understandable because people really didn't need to bug him about his father's death. Thankfully, the audio of this call has never been released and most likely has been lost to time. Bob's passing marked a major shift in the narrative surrounding Chris, as the supposed classic era had finally come to a close. Many trolls voluntarily retired from their trolling endeavors, as they had come to the realization that Bob's death had taken a major toll on his son. Overall, Chris's trolling would start to taper off until the idea guys set foot in Chris's life, thus causing a resurgence of bullfuckery aimed at our favorite autistic. The idea guys successfully influenced Chris to believe many types of nonsensical theories about his late father, such as the claim that Bob is still alive and well in C-197, a fictional parallel universe that houses all of the original characters in fiction and on DeviantArt. Somehow, his spirit transferred from our world to theirs, being transformed into a half Sonichu named Robert Chu, a beaver with a checkerboard pattern fur. Robert Chu apparently met Ted Bundy, and they got along so well that they now work alongside each other to defend Quickville from the forces of evil. And this is a minor thing, but Chris claimed that Robert Chu's design was dumbed down because he found it too complicated to draw the checkerboard pattern, something that could have been pulled off much easier if he just moved on to digital artwork. Bob had several appearances on Sonichu, such as when Jams to Sonichu mentions Bob's founding of Quickville in 1982, presumably after Chris's birth date on the 24th of February, given that he named the city after his newborn son. He appeared in Chris's fantastical retelling of Coming Out, illustrating that Mr. Chandler didn't respond too positively to Chris's newfound sense of fashion. But the saddest part of Bob's story, in my opinion, is how Chris failed him. We've gone over that point quite a bit in this video, I know, but I wanted to bring this up last, as a final point that dictates just how lost Bob probably felt. In 1989, when Chris was still a kid, Bob planned to use a shed as a workshop for him and his son. It was given the title of the Dreaming Studio, belonging to Mr. C and Little C, where dreams do come true. Isn't that just depressing? Ultimately, Bob's story is an unusually tragic one. His story began as simple as anybody else's. He was born to two loving parents, showed signs of being gifted, he excelled at his academics, he answered his country's call for service, and made a name for himself in the fields of aeronautics and electrical engineering. He was a man who worked hard for himself, and most importantly, his family. The dedication to his family did not go unnoticed, as many people online have acknowledged the genuine effort that Bob put in, even if his execution of such things was questionable at best. His own seed was his downfall, bringing him crashing down. His wife and child held him back, forcing him to regress into a husk of his former self, living in filthy living conditions, wasting away to his final years. Despite Bob's efforts to the contrary, Chris was a failure and became one of, if not the most documented person in internet history. His legacy lives on today as the internet lumberjack, who walked in on his son whipping his willy in a spicy Skype cybersex session. He was the polar opposite of his wife and his own son, but alas, he had to succumb to his surroundings. But unfortunately, I believe that's going to be the end for today's video. If you like what I do, leave a comment, rate, and subscribe. If you want to support me in a more personal way, you can check out the Patreon link and the Teespring link in the description. I've got more content coming down the pipeline. But until then, I'll see you degenerates next time.